Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the April 4th, 2013 meeting of the National Capital Planning Commission. And if you would please stand with me and join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do have a quorum, and so we'll proceed with the agenda as has been publicly noticed. I'll also note for all in attendance that today's meeting is being live streamed on the NCPC website. Agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman, and I have 2 items. One is noting that the date for the September 5th, 2013 meeting is actually the first day of Rosh Hashanah holiday, so if there's no objection, I would recommend that we move that to the following Thursday, which would be September the 12th. Any objection? So September meeting will be on September the 12th, not September the 5th, in observance of the holiday. And so if you'll note that, and we also will note that change on the NCPC website. The second item I just wanted to make folks aware of is that the Partnership for Public Service does an annual ranking of the best places to work in the federal government. And in the small agency category, which is typically less than 100 employees, NCPC ranked number 5. And so I think that's a credit to all the staff who work at NCPC, who do such good work and who make this a very special place to work. So congratulations to the staff. That ends my report of the chairman. Any questions, comments? Agenda item number 2 is the report of the executive director, Mr. Acosta. I'm sorry, excuse me. I have another item, agenda item number 1A. We have to, I guess, reconstitute the executive committee, which consists of a vice chair and then a third member. Is there a nomination for vice chair?
I'd like to move Commissioner Miller as vice chair.
It's been moved and seconded that Commissioner Miller from the District of Columbia continue serving as vice chair of the executive committee. Vice chair, and as vice chair, and appointment to the executive committee. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Congratulations.
Thank you for the opportunity to continue serving.
And as
A 100 interested stakeholders attend a workshop here at NCPC to discuss redevelopment opportunities in the Federal Triangle South area, which forms the core of our Southwest Eco District. Last week's event was organized by GSA and Urban Land Institute, and it began with presentations from representatives from GSA and CPC and the District of Columbia Office of Planning. The presentations were followed up by breakout sessions on a number of topics, including land use, cultural amenities, and transactional structures. I know there are a lot of people interested in what's happening on the Southwest Eco District, so we have posted videos of that event on our website for those of you who might be interested in hearing presentations, including one from Dorothy Robine, who's the Commissioner of GSA's Public Building Service. We also invite the public to view and subscribe to our new Heights Master Plan website, which is linked to our NCPC homepage. The public can use this site to learn more about the joint NCPC Office of Planning study, sign up for notices, view and post comments, watch presentations, and follow our progress as we go through the study. Again, you can find that on our website. And finally, on Monday, April 22nd at 6:30 p.m. here at NCPC, we'll hold our next speaker series event focusing on activating our public realm. The event will feature Helen Marriage, who is the co-director and founder of Artichoke, an organization that produces innovative arts and events in the public realm. Following her presentation, Ms. Marriage will be joined by Garth Ross of the Kennedy Center, Jason Schubach of the National Endowment for the Arts, and our own Lucy Kemp for a panel discussion. So we hope the commissioners and the members of the public can attend. It'll also be live streamed, I believe. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report for this month.
Thank you. Comments or questions to Mr. Acosta? Hearing none. Agenda item number 3 is a legislative update from Council. Ann Schuyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congress was particularly busy in March with items of interest to the Commission. On March 13th, they introduced House of Representatives Bill 1126, which is known as the Eisenhower Memorial Completion Act. That proposed act extends the expiration of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission's legislative authority for 3 years from the date of enactment, which right now their authority is slated to expire on May 5th, 2013, next month. The bill also retroactively limits the terms of members of the EMC to 4 years, which I think will lead to a number of reappointments. The bill requires selection of a new memorial design as an alternative to the design selected or submitted prior to the date of enactment of the bill, and it precludes use of any remaining previously appropriated money for construction. The bill was referred to the House Committee on Natural Resources, which convened a public hearing on March 19th of this past month. There were no representatives of the executive branch of the federal government that testified. However, those testifying included Representative Darrell Issa, Susan Eisenhower on behalf of the family, Arthur Cotton Moore, who represented himself and proposed an alternative design, Justin Chuba on behalf of the Civic Arts Society, and General Carl Riddell, who is the executive director of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. The bill at this point is awaiting action by the committee. A further item related to the Eisenhower Memorial was found in the Consolidated and Further Continuing Appropriations Act, which is the bill that funded the federal government. That act has now become public law as of March 26th of this year. The bill appropriates money for the EMC for salaries and expenses, but no money for capital construction, and it extends the expiration date of the Commission's legislative authority to September 30th. So they are now authorized to proceed until September 30th. Well, whether or not action from the previous bill will affect that date remains to be seen. Next, H.R. 217, which is an act to establish an American Latino Museum within the Smithsonian. This was introduced on March 15th. It designates the Arts and Industries Building as the location of the museum, including an annex that will be constructed underground. It authorizes the Smithsonian Board of Regents, in consultation with the Secretary of the Interior, the Commission of Fine Arts, and NCPC, to prepare plans and design, renovate, and construct the museum, and it requires the Smithsonian and the Department of Interior to enter into an agreement on the design and construction of the underground annex. That bill has been referred to committee for action. Last, the House held hearings on H.R. 588, which is the Vietnam Veterans Donor Acknowledgement Act of 2013. The bill authorizes acknowledgement of donor contributions inside the Visitor Center in a form approved by the Secretary of Interior. On March 14th, the House Subcommittee on Public Lands and Environmental Regulation held a public hearing on the bill. The National Park Service presented testimony cleared by OMB through relative executive agencies to include NCPC. National Park Service testimony acknowledged the challenge of funding new memorials, acknowledged the role recognition of large donors plays in effective fundraising, suggested donor recognition might be appropriate given the current financial environment, but subject to specific guidelines, suggested a change in approach to the bill, that donor recognition should be considered for all memorials rather just one, as this proposed bill does, and it suggested development of uniform guidelines on donor recognition and offered NPS, NCPC, CFA, and GSA assistance to the subcommittee in devising the guidelines. Notwithstanding the excellent testimony of the National Park Service, on March 20th, the bill was discharged by the subcommittee and immediately reported out of the Committee of Natural Resources with no amendments. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Schuyler or comments? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Schuyler. Agenda item number four is the consent calendar, and there are currently 2 items on the consent calendar. Item number 4A is the new Sprint wireless telecommunications facility at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. And agenda item number 4B is the new consolidated elementary school at the U.S. Marine Corps Base Quantico. Are there any questions regarding the consent calendar?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to request that we move open agenda item, the first one, the National Law Enforcement Museum revised final site and building plans, to the consent agenda. This is a project that the Commission reviewed thoroughly in the past, and the only remaining issue was almost a construction issue having to do with coordination with the courts, and that issue has been resolved or is on a path to resolution, and the external appearance of this project has not changed since the Commission reviewed it before. So I think for the sake of efficiency, and in fact there's no one here to testify about it, I would think that we could move this to the consent agenda.
The last remaining item is a construction issue, which is not in our purview, really.
Exactly.
And there is no one who has signed up to speak for this. Is there any objection among commissioners to taking agenda item number 5A from the open agenda and putting it on the consent agenda?
The very minor questions we had about elimination of a fire stair and exit door, I think are not significant. The current 13 design is very respectful of the 08 design. We would not have major objections.
Okay. Anyone? No. Mr. Gunning?
Just a question. Is it possible, I wouldn't mind just getting an update in terms of the presentation. Could the commissioners be sent a PDF of the presentation that would have otherwise been given, so that we can
Sure.
be informed about the progress that's being made on the project?
Yep.
All right.
We'll see that happens. So any other comments, or I'm assuming no objections? So without objection, open agenda item number 5A will be included as on the consent calendar as item 4C, and that's the National Law Enforcement Museum at Judiciary Square. So with those 3 items on the consent calendar, is there a motion?
I would move the approval of the consent calendar.
It's been moved and seconded that the 3 items on the consent calendar be approved. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It's unanimously adopted. Thank you. Moving to the open session agenda, agenda item number 5B, 5A having been removed. 5B is the irrigation, drainage, water collection, and re-landscaping of the mall, Phase 2 and 3, and we have Ms. Hirsch. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The National Park Service has submitted preliminary and final site development plans for phases 2 and 3 of the irrigation, drainage, water collection, and re-landscaping of the mall. This project addresses the center lawn panels located between the U.S. Capitol and the Washington Monument, and is based on recommendations in the National Mall Plan, which was adopted by the Park Service and this Commission in 2010. The mall plan included a comprehensive vision to rehabilitate the mall in order to sustain high levels of use, accommodate permitted activities, protect park resources, and provide visitor services and amenities. One of the recommendations in the mall plan included improving the condition of the turf and soil on the mall, but also widening the walkways in order to accommodate the number of public events and national celebrations that take place every year. The project was divided into multiple phases. Phase 1 was approved by this commission in February of 2011 and addressed the 3 easternmost lawn panels located between 3rd and 7th Street. And construction on this portion of the project was recently completed prior to inauguration celebration this past January. Phases 2 and 3 address the remaining lawn panels located between 7th and 14th Street. So images of the existing conditions that you see here indicate the need for the proposed project. With over 25 million annual visitors and over 3,000 permitted events, the mall is intensively used for national celebrations, festivals, First Amendment demonstrations, and all types of recreation. Some of these events require tents, equipment, fencing, and different types of stages. And all of this can have a negative impact on the condition of the turf, has caused soil compaction and poor drainage over the years. In addition, the turf is worn away in several places, and the dust can cause major disruptions at times. So to address these conditions, as part of Phase 1, the Park Service developed solutions to improve the overall health and condition of the turf. And many of these improvements will be implemented as part of Phases 2 and 3. And I'll just briefly review what those are. A granite curb will be installed around the lawn panels to provide structural support and containment for the soil. A gutter system will be integrated into the curb so that water will be directed into an underground water management system. The panels at the corners will be modified with a 15-foot radius. And then the top 18 inches or so of the soil will be removed and re-engineered with a more compact, resistant variety. The panels will also be regraded with a slight crown at the center in order to facilitate drainage. Finally, 2 additional cisterns will be installed below grade, along with a drip irrigation system. 2 cisterns were already installed as part of Phase 1, and so with Phases 2 and 3, the total water storage capacity will be 1 million gallons. Here you can see some images from construction during Phase 1, give you a sense of scale of the project, particularly with the construction of the cisterns on the bottom left, and then a detail of the granite curb and the radius that will be constructed on the lower right. And then these images show the end result of Phase 1. You can see the dramatic improvement in the condition of the turf when compared to panels that have not yet been done just to the east of 3rd Street. So along with the physical improvements, MPS has also issued an operations and maintenance manual that provides new processes and permit requirements for events in order to protect the turf. This manual specifies how long the turf can be covered, as well as a schedule for turf preparation and recovery time between different events. The Secretary of Interior has also signed an order to enforce the small turf manual, further the goals of the mall plan, and guide MPS as it continues to rehabilitate the mall. So in combination, the secretarial order with the mall turf manual are tools that MPS will use to improve the management of events on the mall. And they both provide for special events and activities to continue, but they will also protect the landscape as a historic and natural resource. So the recent inauguration was a test for the Phase 1 improvements, both the physical improvements as well as the operational and management changes that the Park Service is proposing. As required by the new manual prior to inauguration, as you see here, protective coverings were placed over all of the lawn panels. And overall, MPS has reported that it was a success both from the standpoint of introducing new practices to event sponsors, but also the end result in the condition of the mall turf. The photo on the bottom right shows that even with the number of people who attended inauguration, the turf performed fairly well. So as I mentioned, while Phase 1 was under construction, the National Mall Plan was adopted, and therefore the remaining phases of the project, Phases 2 and 3, will introduce recommendations from that plan regarding increasing the paved area on the mall to accommodate public events. So in March of 2012, this commission provided comments on the 3 schemes that MPS was proposing for widening the walkways. In some locations, MPS was proposing at that time to widen the walkways to as much as 146 feet. And while the Commission supported the Park Service's efforts to rehabilitate the mall and accommodate large events, the Commission asked for additional information in order to evaluate the extent to which the walkways needed to be widened. Since receiving the Commission's comments, MPS has held several interagency meetings with NCPC staff, the Commission of Fine Arts, as well as the District of Columbia State Historic Preservation Office. And the results of these meetings basically indicated that the general consensus was to minimize widening the walkways in order to maximize the continuous green of the mall, which is an important character-defining feature, and to preserve views towards the Capitol and the monument, the Washington Monument. In addition to the interagency consultation in determining how and where to widen the walkways in the mall, MPS also analyzed the requirements of typical events that are held every year. And this diagram shows that the highest intensity of use was during the summer months and also located in the panels between 7th and 14th Street. The largest area in the center of the diagram indicates the time period when the Smithsonian Folklife Festival takes place every year in the summer. So essentially, this analysis confirmed that the existing configuration of the walkways between 7th and 14th Street couldn't meet the needs of all of the events without strategically widening them. In determining the appropriate width for the walkways, MPS looked to historical plans, as well as the data on the typical size of tents and equipment that are usually placed on the mall to arrive at their proposed scheme. And in order to accommodate some of the largest events and the tents, and also accommodate circulation for pedestrians and emergency vehicles, MPS determined that 105 feet was the minimum size required that you can see in the sections on the lower right. So the proposed design basically calls to widen the walkways along the 9th and 12th Street corridors to 105 feet. That's in this location and this location here. And the other walkways will be taken from, sorry, I think I went, oops, lost my place here, sorry. The other walkways will be taken from 40 feet to 60 feet. 2 non-turf areas also will be created, sorry, to the north and south of the center lawn panels, just directly adjacent to the metro station in this area, and then directly to the north of the center lawn panels in this location. This will be 146 feet. And then the smaller lawn panels that are located to the west of 7th Street will be combined into one larger lawn panel. So as the Olmsted Junior Plan in the 1930s, this design establishes lawn panels of approximately equal size and a regular pattern of 60-foot wide walkways with 2 wider areas to accommodate larger tents and structures. It does require some changes to the management of events, but the majority of events will be able to be accommodated without impacting the turf. CFA has recently approved the plans for this project, and it noted in its comments how the proposal balances the protection of the historic landscape with the accommodation of public events. So here you can see some renderings. This is the proposal along the 12th Street corridor where the walkway will be widened to 105 feet. And then here, just past the 9th Street corridor, where it will also be widened to 105 feet. And this gives a good idea of how the views in the continuous green along the mall will be maintained. It also provides a sense of how the regrading of the panels accentuates the green along the mall. And so with that, it's the Executive Director's recommendation to approve the preliminary and final site development plans for phases 2 and 3 of the turf and soil reconstruction on the mall, and to note that the project takes into account recommendations from the National Mall Plan to widen the non-turf areas on the mall in order to improve accommodations for large public events and national celebrations. That concludes my presentation.
Questions, or we do have We do have public comment, but prior to going to public comment, are there any immediate questions from Ms. Hirsch? Hearing none, let's go straight to public comment. We have two signed up. First is Dr. Judy Scott Feldman of the National Coalition to Save Our Mall. And Dr. Feldman? There, I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Feldman. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bryant and Commissioners. I'm Judy Scott Feldman, Chair and President of the National Coalition to Save Our Mall. The Coalition is a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization founded in 2000, dedicated to long-range, comprehensive, visionary planning for the National Mall to support the American public's continued use of this symbolic space in the heart of the capital and the nation. The Coalition fully supports the National Park Service's goals for turf grass restoration. Our testimony today focuses on how this project fits with the larger proposal by NCPC and other federal and District of Columbia agencies for this mall area, as described on page 13 of the Executive Director's recommendation. The EDR notes that the 2011 Federal Triangle Stormwater Drainage Study, which I have here, recommends the creation of cisterns beneath the mall to collect stormwater runoff and prevent future flooding, such as devastated the Federal Triangle and mall area in 2006. As noted in the EDR, these flood control facilities might be constructed in the future if funding becomes available. We would like this commission to know that, in fact, there is an ongoing privately led effort to make the flood reservoir idea a reality. This effort is being led by Albert H. Small, a local developer and philanthropist, planner and architect Arthur Cotton Moore, and the National Coalition to Save Our Mall. Since summer 2012, we have been briefing federal and DC officials and agencies, congressional staff, and the public on this concept. We have found much enthusiasm. Last Sunday, the Washington Post published an editorial supporting the idea, a copy of which we've included with our testimony. The idea is this: construct under the mall a hybrid parking garage that does double duty as a stormwater reservoir. Include in the parking separate spaces for cars and tour buses. Also include a separate bottom-level cistern to collect rainwater and groundwater from nearby buildings. This facility would contribute to creating a sustainable and resilient mall for the future. The location for the facility, proposed in a study conducted by Dewberry Engineering, is between 9th and 12th Street. Entrances and exits for the parking facility could be placed in the 9th and 12th Street tunnels to minimize intrusions on the sensitive mall landscape. Underground garages in cities around the world and the United States provide visitor access while creating car-free city streets. Here in Washington, the National Cathedral Bus and Car Garage is a successful example. One model of a hybrid facility that is both parking garage and flood reservoir is this example in Rotterdam. Our proposal hybrid facility solves 3 major needs: a reservoir able to store 34 million gallons of stormwater, cisterns to supply a reliable source of water for irrigation of the grass, as well as all mall area gardens, trees, fountains, and more. The Park Service cisterns, in contrast, will provide only 30% of the water needed for the grass alone, and no flood protection. And parking for more than 1,000 tour buses and cars. An additional benefit is completion of the Park Service's turf grass as the green roof of the facility. Revenue from the self-funding parking component will help offset the capital costs of construction. We are looking at public-private partnerships as a model to develop, fund, and complete this proposal. Additional benefits could include restrooms, a mall visitor center, showers and restroom facilities for bus drivers, integration with Metro and Capital Bike Share, a security office, and an educational demonstration of this innovative water treatment facility. These features are among the amenities suggested during our meetings with the Smithsonian, the Museum, Destination DC, and others. You are looking at draft number 30 of our proposal. Each meeting has helped this proposal evolve. Dirt from the mall excavation can be used to create an earthwork stormwater park or ecological cascade on East Potomac Park to collect, cleanse, and store stormwater until it can be released into the Potomac. Everyone benefits. Visitors will find easier access to the mall's museums and cultural events, much needed as shown in the Fox 5 WTTG television news story last Sunday. Federal and district agencies can get tour buses off neighborhood streets where they cause congestion and pollution. There will be no more need for ugly piecemeal flood measures, such as these sandbags lining Metro vents outside EPA headquarters. and the federal and district agencies will get the much-needed flood protection facility as part of the larger project developed and funded by a public-private partnership. Our proposal still has a way to go, including cost-benefit analysis, traffic studies, and engineering studies, but it is not a pipe dream. With this hybrid facility, the mall will be a model of sustainability and resiliency in the heart of the capital and the nation. This is, in our view, the kind of long-range, comprehensive, visionary proposal we need on the mall to sustain the symbolic landscape's crucial role in our nation's civic life in the 21st century. We believe as well that private sector initiatives such as this will become an important tool for planning and infrastructure upgrades for Washington and the mall in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Mr. Goni?
Dr. Feldman, you mentioned that a public-private partnership and the potential for parking revenue to finance this project. Are you saying that's possible in whole or in part?
It's probably in part the parking revenue. We're actually in the process of talking with a variety of agencies and organizations about the public-private partnership idea. Mr. Small was working with Patton Boggs, who also had some experts looking at it, but really the questions are, we don't know the answer to that. It's been suggested, though, that the parking, and in particular the bus parking, could provide a considerable amount of income. Also, restaurants or other revenue-producing elements could add to that. But frankly, we don't know. We don't know the cost, because the cost of the parking, simply a car parking garage, which Dewberry did for Mr. Small back in 2011, a two-story, 1,000 car garage was $60 million. The cost estimate of this flood reservoir with new sewer lines on Constitution Avenue was 400 and some million. So I think we're somewhere probably in between that, but we don't know yet. But we actually had a meeting this morning, and we're having another one tomorrow to try to get, again, privately funded data to evaluate these questions, because we really don't know that it's feasible yet until we do that.
I have a question. Is the water, so is the is the 400 million exclusive of the water treatment facility in East Potomac Park?
The 400 million, and I'm not sure I read this correctly, if anyone has a better understanding of the data in this, but the 400 plus million comes from this study. This study, which evaluated the stormwater problem, proposed simply a large reservoir under the mall. It would do nothing else. But the cost included the cost of running new sewer lines under Constitution and using pumps to pump the water up into Constitution Avenue. And the cost of all of that seemed extraordinary for something that might not happen that often. And so what we've tried to do is find a way to mix them, but we haven't got the cost yet.
So my question, my follow-up is, can the two things be uncoupled?
Well, that's actually a good question.
Yeah, what's the plan? Could you stop and achieve the objective by not touching East Potomac Park? Could you stop with a modified facility under the mall?
Yes. Yes. Essentially, what we're trying to do, as we've met, and we met with FEMA and with EPA twice, is listen to what they're saying about the water issues. And the question we got from Congress was, what are you going to do with all that dirt? And the question from EPA is, what are you going to do with all that water? So we said, well, we'll put the dirt on East Potomac Park and we'll make it into a waterfall that treats the water. So again, these are evolving ideas. We've been told that they are feasible. But again, the question is, are they fundable? And so we don't know. But the whole idea here is we've been just consulting with everyone to find out what everyone from environmental water experts, Department of Environment in D.C., the American Bus Association, we've been trying to put together something that might get maximum support and also bring in maybe maximum revenue to help fund it. But again, there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Proventia and then Mr. Hart.
To be crystal clear, are you asking for, as opposed to the little bit more conservative National Park Service plan, which has a 1 million gallon capacity and is focused solely on irrigation as opposed to flood control, are you saying that your project in lieu of, or is there a hybrid alternative for this hybrid facility? For example, could the Park Service proceed in your mind with their project, and this could be on a smaller scale, a follow-on project, maybe a little bit more conservative?
We have asked the Park Service about this, and we started briefing the Park Service actually in January of 2012. So, but what we've understood from the Park Service is that if the turf grass moves ahead, we will still be able to accommodate this facility. So however that's worked out, I think that's something that the Park Service would work out with whoever would to build the thing.
It seems like your proposed project, as the hybrid facility, focuses on the flood control, which is perhaps not adequately addressed in the current design.
Actually, if I tell you the truth of how it started, I'm addressing the EDR because I'm testifying before NCPC. The way it started is Mr. Albert Small came to me and said, I want the coalition to help me. No one believes in parking, and I would like car parking on the mall. We convinced him that it needed to have bus parking so that it could really fulfill the needs of larger group. And when this became clear that it was looking for something, it looked to us as though the flood control is the truly existential threat that is not being addressed, but maybe we could address it. So we put the three things together.
Gotcha.
It really started with parking, and for the National Coalition to Save Our Mall, we believe the goal is to bring more people to the mall so that they can better understand and benefit from the mall. And how we do that, parking is one way, whether it's bus or car or metro or whatever. So we did agree with Mr. Small's concept that the mall is a people's place, and that got us going.
I think the Park Service would agree with that, speaking on me. That is a people place.
Yeah, it's my understanding that action on this EDR does not preclude something grander should it ever come to fruition and be proposed.
If you're going to build a $400 million project, it kind of dwarfs the $15 million project. So, yeah, I mean, if that's what's decided in the long run.
Mr. Hart.
I want to thank you for bringing this to the commission. I think it's an exciting idea. It proposes solutions to a couple real tough problems. Obviously, it's not as easy as it might appear, and I know the Park Service would have a whole lot of, concerns that would need to be addressed. But this is a very forward-looking idea, and I applaud you and your organization for bringing it to us as a thoughtful enterprise.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple questions. Is the, you referenced the 2011 two stories underground just for cars that Mr. Small, I guess, commissioned. What is the current proposal? Is it 2 stories? Is it 3 stories? How many buses and how many cars?
Right now, it's about 3 stories. When we started, it was 1,100 cars and 120 buses. The more we've met with DC entities, the more it's becoming more and more buses and fewer cars. We figure also if we build for more buses, if you need more cars, you can always fit a car in a bus parking lot, but you can't put a bus in a car parking lot. There's also been the suggestion that maybe there could be additional parking underneath the waterfall and a pedestrian bridge over the pipe connecting. There are a lot of ideas out there, and that's why I think we wanted to tell you about this, but also we've been seeking so much advice. This is going to probably be pared down, modified, tightened up in one way or another. But did I answer your question?
But the current proposal, which is draft 30, you said, is 3 stories it has the flood and
Yeah, actually, I think
irrigation, and it has 1,100 cars
Yeah,
and
what
two.
Carol Kiriaka has done here, and it's, I know, it's a little hard to see, but see the orange area running down the middle? She's conceiving that like the connection between the National Gallery East Wing and West Wing under the street. And so originally, when Arthur Cotton Moore drew it, we had the visitor center kind of in front of the castle. Now we're thinking more of putting the visitor amenities in an aisle connecting the North and South Mall. As I said, this changes. Every draft is totally, a different one. But this is, so I don't know how many cars, I don't know how many buses, but right now it can hold about 1,500 total.
Okay.
But, that's just where we are right now.
Okay. And just one final question, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the car parking need, do you happen to know how much parking is underground the museums that isn't made currently available due to federal policy, or how many underground parking?
A lot of that was shut down decades ago under the Air and Space Museum and others. When I was a kid, we used to park underneath, but that was a long time ago. But we don't know. It's used for staff parking by and large. And what's been happening is increasingly, I mean, when I was a kid, the roads in the middle of the mall were still roads, and we used to park there as well. So increasingly, we've been taking away the visitor parking and increasing staff parking and security parking. So now when you go up and down the mall, you'll see plenty of parking, but it's all restricted in one kind or another. And so the 1966 Skidmore-Owings Merrill Plan, National Mall Plan, called for under-the-mall parking. And the Smithsonian 1982 plan called for under-the-mall parking. But there's never been the funding or the coordination to have them happen. So what we're essentially doing is kind of giving back what's been taken. And we did find that the Smithsonian and staff in Congress very much would like to see some car parking, because they get calls from their constituency saying, I want to come to the mall, but I can't get there with my 3 kids and my grandmother and so on. So there's in our view, an unmet need by the public, which doesn't really have a say in some of the policy making, that we think this could help resolve.
No, I appreciate that. I just was trying to get at the unused underground parking that is there already.
Yeah.
Do we know what the universe is? It hundreds of
No,
spaces?
we could ask the Smithsonian. I mean, they'd be happy to provide information, but I don't think it's hundreds.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mr. May.
Okay, I think I just wanted to have some comment on this, since it's all about doing something on parkland. What I can say at this moment is that we have gotten some briefings on it. We've not taken an official position on this specific proposal. I will say that the National Mall Plan did consider including parking under the mall, and that was dismissed in the National Mall Plan. So if we were to adopt something like this, we'd have to go back and modify the mall plan. We also previously reviewed a similar proposal from Mr. Smalls in the early 2000s, and rejected it at that time for reasons that are probably obvious to the members of this commission: the impacts on the ground, the fact that we're trying to focus people away from bringing cars to the mall, and so on. But as I said, we have not taken an official position on this. There are certainly a lot of complications associated with this. Everything from an act of Congress if you put in a visitor center, because they're currently prohibited in this area, to I don't know what you'd have to do to modify the tunnels that run through, whether they're subject to interchange justifications.
Actually,
and things
Dewberry
like that.
chose this area because there's a pedestrian tunnel and a steam tunnel that Arthur Cotton Moore assures me are easily moved.
Okay, I don't think it's a matter of engineering
Okay.
as much as it is the legal process that you have to go
Oh.
through if you're going to modify roads that are part of the interstate system. I don't know if they're part of the interstate system or not, but that's another complication. In any case, lots and lots of complications, not to mention the fact that this is the whole idea of this particular solution to the downtown flooding problem is not, I mean, you stated in your presentation that it was recommended. It was one of several that was considered, and it was not the least costly. It was just one of several, and I don't think there was a value judgment about what was the most sensible, except that There were some that were a lot more expensive than this, that they were not going to be considered. But simply improving the infrastructure and building a new pumping facility would have been less expensive than this by a factor of 10%. So, I mean, there are lots of different solutions to that could make more sense in the long run. I will say also that in terms of water that's collected, the ways to get rid of it, you know, what was, I think, envisioned in the stormwater study was, or at least what I understood in the briefings that I've gotten, was that the idea was simply to hold it to the point where it could be pumped into the system and processed, much like the Clean Rivers Project, which is building giant holding tanks under the Anacostia River and then eventually the Potomac, where the water is just held until it can be processed at Blue Plains. So it may not be as complicated as doing yet another project on parkland.
Well, I did have to cut this. We'd be happy to come back to show you the full 55 slides, but all of those questions have come up, and they actually, most of them are addressed, because we met with early on with DC Water and DC Department of Environment and EPA, as I said twice. The question of holding the stormwater, it's going to be dirty stuff. EPA doesn't really like the idea, or DC Water doesn't really like the idea of still getting the water. It goes to Blue Plains. One thing I didn't mention, I don't think, is that the water from the building, a lot of these things we've come up with only as a result of meeting with all these different entities and getting their objections and trying to resolve them in one facility, as opposed to putting bathrooms in one place. But one thing that did come up is that 19% of the water treated at Blue Plains is groundwater. 19% is a relatively clean water, that groundwater could be used for irrigation. And so that's when, and it was after we met with staff here, we said, well, we're going to put the irrigation in. So thank you. But again, when it started, it was a parking garage, and then it became flood reservoir. But what you're seeing really is the result of probably 35 meetings, and I've got 5 more tomorrow, and I've got one in about an hour, with everybody who we think would have an interest, including all the agencies that were flooded. National Archives spent $3 million on repair from just the flood of 2006. One building, $3 million. So again, what we think is a good study, we think this is a good study. We took it as a premise that this is a good study, and we've used it as the base. So if it turns out this isn't, well, that's another problem. But 14 agencies worked on it, and we figured with a good engineering firm, this must be solid.
I'm not questioning the study. I'm just saying that this is only one of several recommendations.
Well, there were
and all
6
of-
recommendations, but it came down to 2, and this is one of the 2, yeah.
Right. And
Yes,
the other
you're
one was
right.
the less expensive one, right?
Well, but the other one would pump the water, it wouldn't hold the water.
Right.
So again, we're dealing with a different green approach. Do we just pump it into the sewer, or do we hold it and then maybe treat
Do we
it? So
pump it to
again,
a facility that's designed to treat water, or do we create another one on parkland to treat the water, is
yes,
what you're suggesting?
as an educational
So that's
component
really,
of the totality.
that's an essential question.
Well, DOE and Department of Environment and DC Water, and I think I can't say because I haven't, really want an educational component. They want something where people can come and learn, and where better could you learn about
no
new
limit to what
new
people want to do
approaches if it's
on
right
park.
on the mall.
Well, rather than debating a project that's not before us, let me
Yes.
go to Mr. Goding for the last comment so that we can go on to our other public commenters. Mr.
I
Goding.
will just suggest that, Dr. Feldman, you have done us a public service to bring this matter to the commission, and that the essence of sustainability is to spend $1 and to get $4 worth of benefit. And I think this is a proposal that solves a lot of problems that various agencies around the city have identified over the years: bus parking, irrigation, stormwater management, et cetera. And that, I think it's an intriguing idea that's worth looking at. Now, I realize it calls for some very unnatural things: cooperation among different government agencies, and cooperation, intergovernmentally among different levels of government, which, we know how difficult that is. But I don't know that the sheer difficulty of it is enough to say that we shouldn't try it. I would like to maybe have some further conversations and look at the financing plan. I mean, if it turns out that, what we have is a very severe stormwater problem that affects not just our combined sewer overflows, but the city has the strictest stormwater permit in the country that requires not the detention, but the permanent retention of water on site for buildings and streets kind of going forward. So the idea that you would release it to Blue Plains is not even on the table, not even in the cards, in the future. And there'll be very steep fees levied by DC Water and the Department of the Environment over all the impervious surface in the city. So this could also generate credits that could be sold to development, so that retention could happen. So I think actually there are some elements of this that are revenue producing that we haven't fully explored. So that's my only last comment for Dr. Feldman, but I think I have some questions for the Park Service once we're finished with the other public witnesses.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could I just make one comment?
Last comment, we got to go.
Okay, because of all the experiences I've had, I strongly hear from people that this kind of approach might work elsewhere, where we could get parking off the streets, maybe cars into peripheral areas, and at the same time have the flood water areas. So what I'm hearing as I talk with neighborhoods and different agencies is maybe this is an approach that could be considered elsewhere as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Returning to the EDR proper, we have one more public presenter, Mr. Lindsley Williams. Welcome, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the...
3 minutes. Nice to see you.
3 minutes. It won't even take that, I think. Okay, sorry, tapped. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, staff, and visitors here at the NCPC. I'm appearing today to ask you to do something much in the same spirit as Dr. Feldman. I'm doing something that I don't think I've ever done before, which is to make a recommendation that the commission adopt the EDR as written, above and below the line, no changes. I usually come in and say, please tweak this, please tweak that. The EDR is solid and ready to go. And it says it'll be open to adjustments so that as opportunities present themselves, we will figure out a way, as long as it doesn't change what you'll see on the surface, to see what we can do. And so what I want to do is to take you back a few months when the commission took up the environment element. And I came in at the last minute of that. Mr. Miller will remember saying, why didn't you speak up earlier? And I asked if we could figure out a way to express the notion that federal lands, when they are not needed for federal purposes, for buildings and for other built stuff, could possibly serve as a sort of a reservoir to receive the things that Ms. Trigoni just spoke of very eloquently, to contain the runoffs. And as I looked at this EDR, I saw a project which proposed cisterns, which will capture enough water to do about 30% of the job on a site of many, many acres, surrounded by a city that is largely impervious. And I'm saying, to what extent can we multi-purpose below the surface so that we can develop credits, monetize it, help defray, maybe build a larger cistern in the process, maybe put in a little deeper soil that would be more absorbent so that there'd sort of be a cistern above it all as well as real cisterns below. And that was the essence of what I asked to be done in the environment element. It hasn't yet been issued, but I know it'll be forthcoming, and I'm really just trying to use this meeting to remind the Commission of the opportunities that are presented by projects such as this, and even the project that follows for the Millennium site over in Virginia. All the water from that, the water from this, that all goes underneath the Wilson Bridge. It all has to be contained one way or another, and it contributes to sustainability. So what I would like to do is just bring this as a reminder, ask you to make no changes, and as you go forward thinking about this and other projects, I'm going to just suggest something that I sort of thought about as I was writing it, which is that we try to develop sites across our jurisdiction in a way that is runoff neutral, so that we try not to have more water go off a site than would have happened if it had been left alone or developed in some fashion. Thank you very much. My time is up.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Yes, sir. That ends the public comment section, so we'll return the discussion to the commission members. Any questions for Mr. Williams? Thank you very much. So we'll return the discussion here. And Ms. Dragoni, do you have?
So, some Park Service questions. So I understand that there is no funding in any of the out-year budgets at this time for this project. Is that correct?
Well, the Congress appropriates money 1 year at a time. So it's true, there's not money in the FY14 budget for this. However, it is in the Park Service's internal capital budgeting for FY14 and 15. So we plan to put that money into the budget in 14 and 15, and if
Did you
there's
put
a
it in
budget-
13 and 14? Did you put it in before?
I think it was in for 13 and it got postponed 1 year. I think that's correct. Maybe Bob Vogel wants to speak to this. This is Superintendent Bob Vogel.
Hi, we did delay the project for 1 year, but we feel as confident as I can stand here with a budget that has not been determined, that the Park Service is requesting funding for this in 14 and 15 for completion of the project.
Frankly, I think we're very confident that it'll be funded. I mean, we had such good results in the first phase that we feel very strongly that it will be funded in 14, 15.
So the other couple of questions have to do with the issue of the sizing of the cisterns, that you'd still, you're not meeting all of your irrigation needs with the cistern size that you have. You're right. Is that several of the speakers have talked about 30% of the irrigation needs being met by the cistern. So I wonder why not 100 or 120% or something.
That's a good question. It's not 100%, but it is our overall project, when it's completed, will meet about 67% of our irrigation needs.
Why not 100% or more than 100%?
That was studied extensively. I mean, and there's sort of diminishing returns as you get to the higher percentages. I think that maybe Suzette Goldstein would want to speak to this more directly. She was the lead designer.
Lead planner from HOK.
I will just say that the ability to absorb the stormwater, to hold it, to retain it, I mean, it is creditable under the proposed stormwater regulations for, that we're doing. Now, how you get money, how you trade those credits might be something that needs to be explored, but it might change the economics of your proposal. So I would really encourage you to...
We did have discussions with other agencies about taking on water from the Smithsonian, for example, and GSA, and they did not lead to anything concrete, but we're still having those discussions, and it would not be hard to expand the cisterns if that would be...
I'm just saying, you talked
before
about...
we build it or even in the future.
You talked about a diminishing return in terms of the cost curve. I'm saying that the revenue that you could get from selling the credits...
Right, no, we understand that. But we were looking for people to contribute to building the cisterns in the first place. And because we know they have to meet certain stormwater retention requirements as well. So
regardless of those, regardless of anyone else cooperating with you, you can independently sell them to people who will need them. So I hear what you're saying, that, but I'm just saying that that's a new development. The final rule isn't even published yet, so it could make a difference.
I think we're more than happy to look at it, and we appreciate the comments on flood mitigation. I think we have consulted with other federal agencies on that, and we continue to do that, and we think that there's nothing in this proposal before you that would preclude us from continuing those discussions and doing further actions as far as flood mitigation too, but we certainly will look at what you're talking about, Harriet, and see what we can do.
I would just say, like, you are at a moment where you have some really exceptional leadership, in the person of the both of you, Peter May and Bob Vogel at the Park Service, who really are looking at much more integrative, comprehensive solutions. This mall is an enormous resource in many dimensions that we hadn't even previously considered. And if there's just a way to accommodate, I mean, the bus parking alone is a pressing concern of the Park Service. So the idea that we might be able to figure out ways to privately finance that, are incredibly appealing. And that I would just encourage you to kind of keep an open mind, and maybe we'll be lucky and you won't get funded next year, and you'll have another year to figure out how to, because the idea that you would invest in this beautiful job that you did on the lawn panels and then look to tear it up again in a couple of years is kind of, sickening for me to even think about. So maybe there's time for these two ideas to kind of come together, and maybe we can work to try to get more urgency, maybe a sense of the Congress that could help make maybe a very uniquely smart thing happen.
And I appreciate your comments, and I myself am hoping we do get the funding. I do think that Dr. Feldman's proposal is very interesting, and we're continuing in dialogue about that, and obviously it requires a lot more depth, and I would say that that process, even if it moved forward in a positive fashion, would take a number of years to get through all the processes of investigation and compliance. So I don't see that a couple of years would be enough time to implement it. But I appreciate your kind comments.
Ms. Prevention? Ms. Prevention, and then Mr. Hart.
The comments that we made about this project when it was presented to us in December of 10, and the very impressive presentation, were that we thought the plan was very comprehensive and very ambitious, and those comments stand. We had made a comment about the signage, particularly with the plea to make it integrated throughout the mall, so that it was friendly to visitors. The focus today of our comments would be along the lines of sidewalk cisterns and use of adjacent streets, and I think they're covered in the EDR to various extents. It appears that the widening of the sidewalks would increase the total sidewalk acreage to by 1.37 acres, increasing from about 41 to 46%. We wonder if that's, particularly if they're not pervious sidewalks, if we might be contributing, particularly in the phase 1 in the 100-year floodplain. We've already experienced, it was mentioned, archives and others that are in that area. We think, though, the general layout of the widened sidewalks is respectful of the Olmsted Jr. 1936 plan, so that's a compliment. But we're also concerned about how the widening might affect or add to already, particularly in the eastern phase 1, the stormwater control. It appears that what we're having in Washington now is a kind of a cyclic experience of drought followed by intense rainfall followed by periods of drought. I think technically we're still even in a drought in DC because of substandard rainfall. While 1 million gallons of water for irrigation sounds impressive, again, if even the total is only about 2/3 of the total irrigation requirement and does not provide any flood control capacity, it seems like perhaps, I think it was characterized maybe as an opportunity lost. To help with this modeling and sizing for the stormwater control, we had a wonderful presentation at our January meeting by Amy Tarse of the NCPC staff, along with Kim Tefekis from NASA and Dr. Rosenweig, the climate adaptation modeling specialist from Columbia University. There seems to be some federal resources that are available to help us with proper modeling and sizing of these water systems. On the widening of the sidewalks and the potential use of the adjacent spaces, I think even the EDR mentioned the consideration for use of Jefferson and Madison. There's the old principle about if we build it, they will come. The reverse principle for special events planners, we have some experience of that at the Pentagon with Rolling Thunder and Army 10 Miler and Marine Corps Marathon and various commemorations, Pentagon Memorial activities, so forth, is that if we make it available, they will fill it up. The corollary there is the more space that's available. I know it's a judgment call of the special events planners as to what the proper mix and balance of pedestrian access and flow is with tent structures. So the nature of our concerns or issues would be probably reassurance, I guess, is what we're looking for, that the calculated expanded width of the sidewalks is based perhaps on historical use of the mall, known deficiencies for some of these events, and widening the sidewalks is a better solution and will not contribute substantively to the flood control issue, that the sizing of the cisterns will continue to be studied, and I think I'm hearing that reassurance. And then if you could address the use or the consideration and the decision not to use adjacent roads like Jefferson and Madison for large-scale events. So that's the three concerns that we have.
Mr. Hart?
Question?
Sorry, Mr. Vogel?
I would ask Suzette Goldstein. I think we have
Sure.
very carefully done analysis, and she can speak to that.
Thank you. And
Sure.
please correct me if I miss one of the 4 points that you wanted me to cover. But the one question you asked was whether we very carefully looked into the use of historical data on the use. And we did extensive research into how the National Mall has been used previously for special events. What sizes of tents, what kinds of tents, how many bathrooms they bring along, how many stages, how many Megatrons, the whole kit and caboodle.
The way we would do that is what we would call an after action. We'd have a get-together of the participants following the event and say, what did we do well that we want to repeat, and where were some shortcomings, areas where we could improve. Capacity planning is perhaps one of those
We did a
improvement
little bit
areas.
of
Is that the kind of approach?
Slightly different. We did a couple of things. We looked at historic data. We were luckily able to get historical data from the permitting department from the
Good.
National
Yep.
Park Service. The Park Service requires a site plan for every event that comes through, and as well as the permittee offers population estimates or participation estimates. So we had that kind of data so that we could evaluate the intensity. We knew the duration and the length of both setup and event.
Right.
We knew the locations. We knew the amount of equipment and the things that they brought. So we took all of those things and evaluated in any number of ways. In addition to that, we kind of impaneled our own sort of internal experts. It was part of the development of the O&M manual. We hired someone who's a gentleman who's a professor at GW University and an events planner himself.
Good.
We also hired a turf management specialist who also is a event operator, a handler. He actually sets events up. So we had that looked at from both the people side and the grass side so that we could understand the events from both sides there. And also as a part of that process, we did a focus group with events vendors. So we had people there representing the tent industries, the lighting, the AVs, so on and so forth, all the different participants, all the different components that go into setting up an event. So from that knowledge base, as well as the historical data that we could get from the permitting department, we quelled that down, did evaluations on how many events are currently held. I will tell you, they pretty much all use the grass right now, which is why it looks as bad as it does.
Right.
And is completely unacceptable to continue in that mode. We looked at what kind of events would then no longer be permitted, would no longer be accommodated. I shouldn't say permitted, I should say accommodated on there once we changed the pass system and no longer allowed people to just freely use the lawn, but highly discourage their use of the lawn. And the proposal that you see before you is the compromise of those things. That proposal will require something like 47%, and that's pretty much all of the bigger events, to modify the way they do business. So they will no longer come down there with 10 humongous tents or 5 humongous tents. There will be specific locations they'll be directed to set those up in order to keep them off of the turf panels.
I see.
The National Park Service is working very closely with some of the big operators right now. They worked intimately with the inaugural committee to make sure that that area is protected, and it was a test case that worked very successfully. So Smithsonian is probably the largest event on the mall, and they are working very intimately with them right now to make sure that they kind of rethink about the way they do things so that they can preserve the integrity of the landscape.
Okay. Thank you, that's a very helpful to explain what the process that you went through.
And then I now talked so long I forgot your other 2 points.
The other two are about cistern sizing and use of adjacent roads.
The adjacent roads, we actually are suggesting that the larger events will use the adjacent roads.
Okay.
Like the Smithsonian in particular.
Good.
We would like them to kind of, or we like in large events such as that to be more like street fairs now and less like big carnivals down the middle of the mall. So those big events would be able to use the adjacent roads, and the National Park Service is in control of those 2 roads, so they have the control to approve or not approve a particular event to do that. So that is something that's on the table. Regarding
And
the
cistern sizing, the specific concern was, for example, if phase 1 is within the floodplain, and that's $500,000, and phase 2 and 3 are outside the floodplain, and it's the same size, collective size of the cisterns, I'm having a hard time reconciling that.
Well, all of our walkways are being pitched and drained, or pitched back towards the drainage systems that we're providing that's integrated into the granite curb edging. So it's our intention to pick up all of the water that's hitting those walkways, and they're all graded to do that. So we shouldn't be contributing water elsewhere because we're picking it all up. So when we widened those couple of walkways, they're still being pitched back to our drains, and all of that water is still going back to our cistern. If we pick up more water, that's actually a benefit for our irrigation calculations.
I think I want to clarify, the floodplain doesn't really have a lot to do with this, and in the long run, none of these areas are going to be in the floodplain once the levee is completed. Anything that is, if there's any overlap between the floodplain and the turf panels, and I'm not sure how much there is, I don't think there's really much at all, if any, it doesn't really bear on it. I mean, what we're really talking about is the water that falls on the turf panels and on the walkways will be collected and put in and saved in cisterns.
I'm glad you mentioned rainfall. We did a rough back-of-the-envelope calculation. With about a 50-acre on the mall, it would only take about 7/10 of an inch to fill up the million-gallon collective cisterns.
Can't say I've ever done the calculation that way, so it would be, I'd be hard-pressed to answer it exactly.
We were interested in capacity. And again, if it's just for irrigation and this suffices 2/3 of the requirement, it's clearly a step in the right direction. What's the general time frame for the levee? I'm just trying to get a handle on how long we might have to live with the existing conditions.
You might check with your colleagues at the Corps of Engineers about when they expect to finish it. But the latest thing they told us was this summer.
Okay, good.
Mr. Hart.
One question, and I'm not sure if it's Mr. Vogel or maybe Peter. We heard an interesting proposal from Dr. Feldman today. Is there anything in phases 2 and 3 that would preclude some kind of solution as was proposed here down the line? It looks like the cisterns are under the walkways, not under the panels. And I think that what I saw in those exhibits of Dr. Feldman's is most of the structure was under the grass panels. I hate to see us putting investment in the way of something that we might want to change in the future.
I mean, the concept that we saw today really is just a concept, so it's hard to know exactly what the footprint would be and what it might affect. But there's the investment that's being made in some of these pieces of infrastructure are not so large that if the powers that be decide that we need to spend several $100 million building this facility, or that it makes sense economically to justify it, I mean, there's no real reason why we couldn't go in and do that. And we'd salvage as much of what we put in now that we possibly could, once we replace the turf panels, if it were to go on top of a structure like this.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's really, it may not be the most economical way to do it, but we have an immediate need to address the turf, and that's what we want to move ahead with right now. If there's something better for the entire area that comes in the future, that's just going to have to be weighed in as one of the costs is redoing some of the work.
Yeah. I was just, from what I could see, it looked like there's nothing that was going to be a big obstacle in the future should an idea like that proceed.
I don't see big obstacles. I mean,
and what the last discussion about the stormwater management, you're really only intercepting the water that's in the middle of the mall, on the grass panels and in the walkways that's going to those cisterns, not from Madison or Jefferson?
That's right. We're open to the possibility of expanding the cisterns and collecting more water and covering 100% of our needs, but the conversations that we've had so far about getting help in building those structures has not yielded anything yet. But they're not over either. I mean, it could still happen.
Last comments, Mr. Goni? I'm sorry.
I actually had a proposal to make. This has been an unusually rich discussion, and I feel like if we approve the EDR exactly as written, that it won't reflect kind of our hopes and aspirations that some of these ideas could be incorporated. So I have some proposed amended text. It doesn't affect the overall approval, so I hope it won't meet with objection from the Park Service. After the current recommendations and the notes, I would say that urges the National Park Service to size the cisterns to accommodate 100% of their need for irrigation water, and notes that this approval should not preclude consideration of more ambitious plans to accommodate more stormwater, flood control elements, and potential bus parking. Although obviously that would require return to the commission for those plans. But like I said, I don't think it affects the approval, but it does, I think, reflect a sense of the commission discussion that this is what we all in a perfect world aspire to, and would hope that we can collectively try to make some of these things happen.
Can I speak to that?
Of course.
I think noting that this doesn't preclude that something else could happen in the future, I don't have great anxiety about that. It is just a note, and all we're doing is saying that this doesn't, capture some of the conversation today. Urging the Park Service to resize the cisterns to capture 100% of the stormwater, I do believe is problematic. We have a fully designed project. We are open to the idea that it could be expanded in the future if there is demand for that storage. But even as it is, they're bigger than we believe will reasonably fall there. I mean, a certain amount of water will fall, a certain amount will be lost to evaporation. We're capturing everything that falls. We expect to capture everything that falls except in an extreme storm event. So making it larger is only going to be of marginal benefit to us.
Not if you capture it from other
Right, and so
locations.
to suggest that we would be open to expansion to capture additional water, if you want to note that, I don't have a problem with it, but you're urging us to size it to capture 100% of our need when we're not, that's basically telling us that we must go out and try to find, get the Smithsonian to give us their water or DDOT to give us their water. We've made some of those attempts, and we can't invest in the additional infrastructure at this point. We're open to it if somebody comes with dollars on the table and through whatever means, whether it's by the credit system you mentioned or something else, we're open to it. That's why I say we would be open to an expansion, but to urge us to size it larger, I think, is problematic.
So how about if I add urge you to consider?
Why don't you just include it in the notes part at the bottom? I mean, you had another thing about notes that we're open to the future. Why don't you say notes that we're open to expansion of the cisterns?
Notes that it's desirable for the Park Service to consider sizing the cisterns to accommodate 100% of their irrigation needs. I'm happy with that.
Say it again.
Notes that it is desirable for the NPS to meet 100% of their irrigation needs through larger cisterns.
I would like to ask my colleagues at the mall who are more intimately involved with the design here to talk about whether it's really practical for us to simply size it that way. I mean, you all want to explain it?
Maybe a suggestion to say it in a more positive way, that we're encouraged that they're open to pursuing this, because you stated it publicly.
Right.
Would that help resolve it?
I mean, I would be happier with that language than even the last version.
I would just say I'd like to not put the onus not just on you, but I could help on the DC street side. Others might be able to help with other buildings. So I think I have a helper who wants to talk right now, yes?
I would. But first, Pedro, I've known you for a long time, and you're like that guy in the Life cereal commercial. You know, let's give it to Mikey. He hates everything. This is aspirational language. There's nothing wrong with that.
This is not, urging is not aspirational language. I don't have any problem with aspirational language.
But what's wrong with desirable? Touch that one. I just don't get why we have to always operate with this abundance of caution, which I've said before, and not express aspirational goals in the language that comes out of here. Why is that so it just makes you break out? What's up with that?
Well,
I don't get it.
Instead of getting off on that discussion, let's
No, but
let's
it's
try
an
to,
important discussion,
let's try to
Preston,
put
because
forth some specific language.
This
Do you
is-
have specific proposal?
desirable, I think, is
Okay,
completely.
repeat it again, please.
Notes that it's desirable for the notes that it's desirable for the National Park Service to consider meeting 100% of its irrigation needs through upsizing or resizing their cisterns.
It's a softball.
Okay. Fine.
So
So that's a motion. That was a long motion.
So it's been moved and seconded that the language roughly is, notes that it is desirable for the NPS to consider meeting 100% of its irrigation need through expanded systems.
Something, yes. And that there was another note, right? The second note was, notes that this approval should not preclude consideration of more ambitious plans to accommodate more stormwater and flood control elements and potential bus parking.
Can you say that again?
Notes that this approval should not preclude consideration of more ambitious plans to accommodate additional stormwater and flood control elements and potential bus parking. We can certainly say as presented in testimony during the commission's consideration of this project.
Okay, so aspirational, but probably not practical. That seems a reach to include the bus parking here, because there's no way they can do that without digging right now.
Right. But I think that's all, I mean, everyone testified that they're open to these other ideas. And right now, because of the likely timing of this project, they can't be considered as part of this project, but that's a big uncertainty. We have no idea in this fiscally constrained federal government environment when and whether this project will get funded in 15. This might be utterly meaningless. If it turns out that there's time for these projects to converge, this language suggests that they try to make that happen.
Okay, I think we understand the
Intention.
two amendments, or one amendment, two amendments. Are they?
One amendment.
One amendment. Mr. May, any further discussion?
No, I mean, I wouldn't interpret the last comment. I mean, maybe your hope that these two projects do converge, but I will repeat once again, we are very, very optimistic that we're going to be funded in the short term. And I would also say that this other project has a very difficult path ahead.
Understood. I love your optimism.
That's what I'm saying. I agree with him there.
Okay.
And my pessimism.
Council, you have no concerns about, okay. Right. It's been moved and seconded that the amendment, I guess this is one amendment.
Are we voting on the, just the amendment?
Just the amendment.
Okay.
Just the amendment.
Question about the procedure. If we can live with the first half but not the last half, do we need to split this baby at this point?
Let's vote on the whole
For
thing
the-
first, and then we can decide, right? I can offer an amendment.
Good. I think it's been moved and seconded, the amendments.
Yes.
All in favor of the amendments as read, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. One no. So now before us is the EDR as amended. Is there further discussion on the EDR as amendment? Mr. Miller, you had
I'm
some.
sorry, I had one question which I didn't get to ask about the, and maybe the Park Service representative would be the one to ask about the 146 wide walkway that's proposed. Is there's a 146 wide? 100, along 12th Street, from the 12th Street Metro north-south.
The Metro Plaza is 146 feet, yeah.
What is driving the, my question is, what is driving it to be 146 feet wide, that a 105-foot width would not accommodate there, since it's now, I guess,
The wider walkway, and the number 146, an odd number, came from alignment with adjacent sidewalks. So from a design standpoint, that's where they came from. The need for that width comes from the ability to set up some of the larger tents. So we've gone from the ability to set up big tents anywhere they want to on the mall to that one location where they'll be able to put the very largest tents.
Can I also point out, we did look at filling those with lawn panels in some of the early versions of this, and in discussions with the Commission of Fine Arts, they felt very strongly that if we have a need to accommodate these larger tents, that those side panels that are out of the view shed between the Capitol and the monument, that would be the best place to have those larger areas. And that was something that they came to and agreed on very early in the process, that that's the best way to try to handle the things, the really big stuff.
okay, thank you.
It's not a service tent? Is that for service tents? Or is it for like catering tents and
It's
stuff
part
like
of
that?
the events.
Yeah,
Could be any part of the event.
okay.
Thank you.
Is there a motion on the EDR as amended? So moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as amended, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We're done. The last item on the agenda, I believe the last item on the agenda, it's agenda item number 5C. It's the Arlington National Cemetery Millennium Project, and we have Mr. Hart. And we do have public comment. I'll note 4 people have signed up to speak. Mr. Hart, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The project before you today is the Millennium Project. It is located in Arlington, at the Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington County. It is submitted by the Department of the Army for concept review. As you're aware, this is the Arlington National Cemetery. It is also where this Millennium site is located. You'll note the Millennium site is located in the northwestern portion of the Arlington Cemetery here. It is one of 2 expansion projects that the Army is proposing. Two expansion projects that the Army is planning. The other site is at the southern end of the cemetery, and it's called the Navy Annex site. In the mid to late 90s, Congress became concerned that the Arlington National Cemetery would cease being an active cemetery, and it passed laws to extend the life of the cemetery through the expansion on nearby lands, which are these 2 sites. The site before you again is just the Millennium site. The Army states that without this project, the cemetery is expected to reach capacity in 2023. The Army also states in its the EA that is out for public comment that this project is expected to extend the life by 7 to 12 years. This parcel is made up of land transferred from both the National Park Service as well as Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall. The yellow part of the parcel that's shown here was transferred from Fort Myer in 2004. And just for your orientation, north is to the top of the image, and the outline in white is the actual Millennium Project. Excuse me. The green striped area shown here is a parcel that was transferred from the National Park Service in 2002, and it is part of the historic setting of the Arlington House. The Arlington House is shown here. And then finally, there's a purple section, and this is the existing maintenance yard for the cemetery, for ANC contractors. Arlington House is listed on the National National Register of Historic Places. The law that transferred the NPS site, and this entire site, you see the area that's called Section 29. It is the green striped area as well as the dotted part of the green area here. So all of that is Section 29. That stated that the land needed to be used for in-ground burials or columbaria, which were to be designed with the site contours. It has been planned or under development since the early 2000. Excuse me. I'd like to note that the Arlington House historic setting includes woods found in both the green and green striped area, which I noted earlier, and the woods closest to Arlington House are the oldest, which date back 235 years. There are other wooded areas, and those ages I'll describe in a little bit more detail in upcoming slides. So here's the site itself. The land from Fort Myer Henderson Hall, from Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall, is generally an open area with some trees as well as grassy areas, while the land from the National Park Service is generally wooded. There are moderate to severe slopes on either side of the perennial stream, which run through the site. The existing stream bank has been eroded from previous storm events, and a restoration will be included as part of this project. And you see the stream shown here, blue. Excuse me. I'd like to talk about the existing conditions. Here are a few images of the site. The top image includes Fort Myer or Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall on the right-hand side of the image, and the Millennium site is on the center and on the left. So all of that is the Millennium site. You'll note a historic boundary wall. This is kind of a dark line that goes through the site. That's actually that used to be the dividing line between Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall and the cemetery. And a 1,300-foot portion of this wall will need to be removed as part of this project. The Army states it will reuse pieces of the wall in the construction of the perimeter wall when it's built, and I'll describe that in a little bit more detail in an upcoming slide. Another condition image, some other condition images. These are, the top one is from the Arlington National Cemetery maintenance area. It's looking, you note on the map on the bottom right, it's looking towards the west. And the other images are of the Arlington Woods. In the bottom left, the stream, this is actually the stream, the part that's been eroded. This gentleman is standing actually in the middle of the stream, so that's fairly, quite a bit of erosion that's taken place. So next we'll get to the proposed site plan. The Army developed 6 alternatives as part of this project over the last few years, and has chosen this alternative E1, as its preferred alternative. I'll describe each of the elements of the design in upcoming slides. The plan includes 29,922 burial sites for both interment and inurnment burials. So for in-ground burials, they're shown here in the yellow-orange color. There are 3 different types, and they are a traditional burial, a pre-placed crypt, and an area for cremated remains. The traditional area is here. These are burials very similar to what is occurring now in the rest of Arlington National Cemetery. These pre-placed crypts are concrete structures that are placed side by side, and they're actually in the ground, and they're covered with between 18 and 24 inches of soil. These allow caskets to be placed closer together and therefore increasing the number of burial spaces available. The final area, and their cremation or cremated remains, one area is over here for in-ground burials, another area is over here, so on either ends of the Millennium site. This allows, the Army allows families the choice of either having in-ground burials for cremated remains or using the niches. And I'll talk about the niches in the upcoming slide. Excuse me. The columbaria, you see an image of an existing columbaria, one of the courts that's actually currently exists on Arlington National Cemetery. They provide niches or small spaces for cremated remains, and they're shown in this image on red. There are 3 court areas, columbaria A, columbaria B, and columbaria C. Again, going from east to, or from left to right, or right to left, A, B, and the C is these 2 areas. And then there's a perimeter niche wall, and that's shown here along the border with Joint Base Meier-Henderson Hall. And finally, there are other improvements to the site as well. They include a loop road that connects to Ord and Wetzel Drive. That's an existing road that's shown in the right-hand portion of this slide. And 2 committal shelters, they are shown in yellow. Several bridges, they are purple color, and also stream restoration projects as well. There are also pathways which will lead to the columbaria. The pathways will also lead to the in-ground burials areas as well as the perimeter wall. The loop road is being proposed because caissons, and you see an image of it up in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, there are horse-drawn carriages. They're used for some of the funerals, and they are really only able to be moved forward, so they need to have some way of coming back to the Ord and Wetzel Drive as they proceed to the burial sites. Here's a section of the site showing the different elements of the project. This section is shown here in the upper right-hand side. The section includes what's happening at Joint Base Meier-Henderson Hall on the left-hand side, the perimeter niche wall, the pre-placed concrete crypts here, the loop road, columbaria C, the stream restoration area, the other portion of columbarium C, and then the other portion of the loop road, and then continuing on to the existing woodland area. And I'll give you a little bit more of a detail of this, so I know it's a little hard to read. This is a section through the perimeter wall, the boundary wall with Joint Base Meier-Henderson Hall. The wall itself is 13 feet on the Arlington National Cemetery side, and this side is the Arlington National Cemetery side, which is the right-hand side of the slide. This side is the Joint Base Meier-Henderson Hall side. So this wall, perimeter wall, will act as both where the niches are. It will also be a barrier between the 2 facilities, and then act as a retaining wall, as you note. The side, the height of the wall on the Joint Base Meier side is actually just 4 feet in height. The design includes a beam and lintel elements in the design, and this is to help create a sense of enclosure, and I'll show you what that looks like in this slide. These elements are kind of perspective renderings. This rendering at the top is taken from the loop road looking up towards where the perimeter wall is. This is looking along the wall, so you're standing, at one point and looking down the length of the wall. Again, the beams and the lintels helping to give that sense of enclosure. And this image is just to show that there is an existing niche wall at Arlington National Cemetery. This is actually interesting, it's the, on the other side of this is Route 110, and it is a niche wall on this side, and on the other side it looks just like a regular brick wall or a regular stone wall. Now I'll move to the section showing the, excuse me, the stream restoration area. This road is 30 feet wide. The loop road is 30 feet wide on this side and 22 feet wide on the other side. The portion of the stream itself, which is shown here, it is going to be restored as part of this project. And with that restoration project, they are actually preserving some of the trees that are on the site today. And there are two, as you noted earlier, there are two columbaria on either side of this stream restoration area. And these columbaria actually point in toward the stream restoration area to provide a sense of a passive and calm sense for the family members coming to the site. And finally, there's a section of the a further section of the site, again looking at the existing tree line, the 22-foot road, and then the columbaria on the side here. And there's a retaining wall that's being proposed as part of the project because of the grade in this location. And these are really showing the images showing the columbaria A, which is a curved element that was on the kind of northern side of the Millennium project, as well as a committal shelter. And committal shelters are gathering points in the cemetery, and they have several of them existing in the cemetery now. These two are being proposed for this area in particular. I'll note that this committal shelter is near the columbaria that are near where the stream restoration area is. And you can actually see the columbaria, and you'll note them. They're kind of dark, but they are. This is actually the top of those columbaria. So this is a grade change between where this is and where these are located. And they're kind of following the grade of the land. There's another project, another portion of the project that's a little bit off the site. This is the Millennium site itself, and this is the location of this project, which is a stormwater cistern project. Really, they're looking at finding ways to better treat and kind of deal with the stormwater coming off of this surface parking. To do that, they are taking up some of the pavement that's around some of the existing trees in the parking lot, and they're adding in replacing the intake structure, helping to do some treatment of the rainwater. And really, a lot of this is because there's this parking lot is draining down into the existing stream, and the stream is over here. They're doing this to help to fix some problems, some erosion problems that they're running into, because the water is currently just running off and eroding some of the hillside. And this area here is the part of Arlington Wood, so they're proposing this to help deal with that problem. So staff reviewed the proposal and has identified the following issues. The comprehensive plan, there is a tree replacement policy which indicates that where tree removal is necessary, there should be no net tree loss. So the Army should strive to meet this policy. The Army states that it is removing 882 trees, and as mitigation is planting 600 native trees and 500 native shrubs as part of the project. Historic preservation is also a part of the is also a concern. The National Register nomination for Arlington House includes a portion of what's now the Millennium site. This is the part that was transferred from the National Park Service to the Army. The Army has been aware of this and has been studying the various impacts on the project. It began identifying the impacts to the various tree stands that make up the site, and also exploring the visual impacts. It's also seeking ways to minimize these impacts by making changes to the design and proposing mitigation. So what is all this kind of talking about? The Army has gone through and looked at the tree, the age of the tree, the various tree stands. Just for, again, for the orientation, this is the Arlington House. And the area that you see that's highlighted in kind of red, there's a yellow area, blue area, all of that was part of this, they call it Section 29, but it used to be, it is all of the setting for Arlington House. This portion of it, the yellow portion, and then the red and pink portions, so all of that area, was transferred to the Army for the Millennium Project. So you'll note that there is an impact with the loop road that is being proposed through the 145-year-old tree stand. The 165-year-old tree stand is not, there are no trees that are going to be removed in that area. And then the 235-year-old tree stand, that's actually still National Park Service property, and there are no trees to being removed in that area. The Army also looked at the impacts to trees with the various alternatives that they explored. This image shows all the trees removed as part of the initial design, which is alternative A. It called for the removal of nearly all the trees in the 145-year-old area. And it's hard to read, but these are actually, they're red X's on this to show that all these trees are being removed. All these trees are being removed, and the trees here in this kind of blue-purple area are being removed as well. And in this area, there are 362 trees in this area that they are moving in this alternative. Alternative E, which is one of the alternatives that they were exploring, shows that they are actually preserving some more trees as part of this, some more trees in the 145-year-old tree stand area. And in this, which is the preferred alternative, they're showing that they are, after study and basically taking out or not trying not to remove some of the more sensitive trees or the older trees in that 145-year-old tree area. They have further reduced the amount of impact and are now looking at just 167 trees in that kind of red area that they will be removing. For the visual impact study, the Army is...
Quick question before you go on. On the tree mitigation, forestry mitigation, you said they're going to be replacing 600?
Yes.
Where and of what size and type? I don't see that.
They're actually replacing it in this entire area. There's some they're adding in here. There's some trees they're adding in here. They're adding trees that are along the stream because currently there's not a lot of there are trees on kind of one side and a little bit on the other side, but they wanted to increase that buffer. And most of these are fairly small. I can leave it to the Army. The Army is here. They can answer the caliper of tree that they're looking at replacing. But you know, the 145-year-old tree area, that's the age of the oldest trees that are there. Right. So there is a variety of trees. Some of them are you know, fairly young and 6-inch caliber. Some of them are much larger.
Sure. Right. Thank
you. The Army is also conducting a visual impact study, or they've in the process of conducting that. The map on the upper left-hand side of this image identifies which views were part of this study. This analysis demonstrates that which views will be impacted, and generally speaking, the views that are impacted the most that they've identified are really from here looking down into it. They looked at the images from Arlington House. So what can you see from Arlington House? These two photographs are showing that view towards the Millennium Project. Because of the amount of tree cover, really you can't see much at all. They also looked at the views from other kind of high points. These are actually on the cemetery itself. The Army is looking at other views, one from the 235-year-old stand, so what's the view impact from there, as well as from Ord and Wetzel Street. And I want to say there's another view that's about in here looking at the proposal as well.
Carlton, sorry for interrupting, but have there been any simulations made yet?
Well, actually, this one includes a simulation.
How?
They are putting in where the wall is from Fort
Okay.
Myers.
So, but what I'm asking is, so these views up on the right have the tree stand, that those trees will be unaffected?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, so because really you're looking through a fairly heavily forested area towards
Down
this,
to it,
and
okay.
you're looking down at it.
Right.
So it is a little
it.
bit difficult to kind of to see that. Staff would encourage the Army to continue looking at the visual impact study, especially the views from the woods themselves, from the 235-year-old wooded area towards their site. The Army is developing mitigation as part of the NEPA and Section 106 consultation processes. This includes this list here, and they are looking at documenting and possible reuse of the existing boundary wall, and that would be on the as cladding on the perimeter wall that I showed a little earlier. And the Army is in the process of meeting with consulting parties to address the concerns raised during this process. And staff has received comments from local citizens groups about this project. The main concern has to deal with the impact on the 145-year-old tree, the woods that are here. The Army is, as I said, looking at maintaining quite a few of the trees, particularly around where they're restoring the stream, and the stream is generally in this area, going down to the to Orden Wetzel Drive. That's what they're looking at doing now. And with all of that, the Executive Director's recommendations at the Commission note that Arlington National Cemetery is projected to reach full capacity in 2023. In recognition of this fact, Congress directed the Secretary of the Interior to transfer a portion of the Arlington House Woods, then under the jurisdiction of the NPS, to the Secretary of the Army for the expansion of the cemetery. Arlington House Woods are part of the historic setting for the Robert E. Lee Mansion and Robert E. Lee Mansion Memorial, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act directs federal agencies, officials, to take into account the effect of the undertaking on any resources listed or eligible to be listed in the National Register. The federal environment element of the comp plan states that when tree removal is necessary, trees should be placed to prevent net tree loss. And the creation of new burial sites in this area cannot be accomplished without substantial tree loss, including adverse effects to the Arlington House Woods. The Commission also notes that the current proposal reflects the result of ongoing efforts to reduce adverse effects to the Arlington House Woods, and includes mitigation measures included stream restoration within the woods. And then the Commission therefore comments favorably on the concept design and directs the Department of the Army in subsequent submissions to continue to refine the design to minimize harm and provide appropriate mitigation through consultation as required by the National Historic Preservation Act, continue to refine the visual impact survey in ways that are responsive to consulting parties, including the National Trust for Historic Preservation and members of the community, explore decreasing the width of the roadbed in the area of the Arlington House Woods as a further way of reducing tree loss, and finally prevent a net tree loss by exploring the possibility of planting trees at Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall or on the National Park Service property. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you. We have a number of folks who have signed up to speak, so if we could just go straight to the public comment section. And I have, I'll just read off the four names so folks can be preparing. First, let's hear from Catherine Condon of the Arlington National Cemetery. She will be followed by Bernard Byrne. Third would be Caroline Haynes, and fourth, Robert Keller. So, Ms. Condon, welcome.
Thank you. Since you had the briefing, I'll keep my remarks somewhat brief. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been no greater mission for me personally in my 30-year government career than being trusted with the care of Arlington National Cemetery. And each and every day, just to put it in perspective, we literally provide services for 27 to 30 veterans and their loved ones each day. But each day, we get 45 requests to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. And that's the reason why these expansion projects are so vital to our veterans and their loved ones. One of the first issues I faced when I started at Arlington on June 10th, 2010, I'm not going to talk about being on the front page of the Washington Post, but was the fact that we literally were going to run out of burial space at Arlington National Cemetery. And the first thing we were going to run out of space was for columbarium space for cremated remains. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in last fiscal year, the trends nationwide are changing. More and more people are being cremated, vice being casketed for their final burials. So in 2012, we had 62% of our burials were cremations, and 38% of those were casketed, or 28, I'm sorry. So that's why we presented to this body the need for our 9th columbarium court to be the first thing that we addressed at Arlington. I'm very proud to say, if I could have all of you save the date, on May 9th of this year, we are going to have the dedication ceremony for the 9th columbarium court, which will add the niche space to Arlington, so we will no longer run out in 2016. That will change our niche space to 2024. So now that means that why this Millennium Project is so vital is because both our in-ground burial space in 2023 and our niche space, we will run out of space at Arlington by 2024. So that's why this project is so very important to us. And let me say here that we have been tremendously conscientious to be good environmental stewards in this design. The design that Carlton has presented to you today has had several iterations since then, where we have addressed the concerns that not only this body, but also the Commission of Fine Arts has presented. So with that, that is my comments for today. And thank you for your support in all of the projects that we've had at Arlington National Cemetery.
Thank you, Ms. Condon. Mr. Bernard Byrne, welcome. You have 3 minutes, and you'll be followed by Ms. Caroline Haynes.
Yes, I would like to ask you a question. Would you want somebody to destroy a 140-year-old woodland, about 800 trees, just so you could be buried there? Something for you to think about. This is going to, if this goes forward, it will soil the reputation of Arlington National Cemetery, as well as dishonor the heroes who would be buried there. Some of them will realize it. Some of their families may. Most won't, because they come from other parts of the country, but many will. It's a big issue. The question is, why hasn't the Army or anyone looked at the Pentagon parking lots as an alternative for this? You can build, obviously build structured parking there. Besides, it was built in World War II. There are probably excess spaces anyway. Never have they looked at this. I suggested this back in the EI, in the environmental assessment back in 2000. I suggested in the most recent one in January. I got no response. This is a substitute. It's the way to do it. And it's the only way to do it, because otherwise you're going to run out of space in about 20 years anyway. This has to be looked at. And it should be looked at before you go forward with this project. Now, how did this... Back in about 2000, after the first law was passed, the National Park Service representative came to you and said they only wanted to transfer 2 acres instead of 12. What happened? Somebody got a bill through Congress that directed the Secretary of the Army the transfer of it from the Secretary of the Interior to the Department of the Army, and of 12 acres rather than the 2. And then and said that it had to be used for columbarium burial space. That was Public Law 107-107, Defense Authorization Act of 2002. There's only really one solution to this, and those of you who are concerned about this loss of trees and people being dishonored by being buried there and not using the Pentagon parking lot can do. And that is to ask the Congress the members of Congress, some of you are representatives, Congressman, to amend the Defense Authorization Act of 2014, which is coming for markup in June of this year, to transfer this property, the internment zone, 12 acres, back to the Secretary of Interior, and to require the Secretary of Defense to identify other suitable areas for the expansion of Arlington Cemetery before anything goes forward. And you can do it only by amending the law. There's nothing else you can do about it. If it gets marked up, I don't think that the Secretary is going to proceed with any of his plans until this gets resolved later in the year. That's the only way to do it, and that's what I'm asking you to do, to first of all reject this, just say, okay, if the law isn't passed, you can go forward with it. But at least let Congress give a chance. That original law, that's 107, I went through the congressional record. There was no committee reports on it. It looks like it came out off the House floor. I didn't see any discussion either. Nobody ever looked at the environmental assessment about this when they passed the law. The original law, which is back in 1996, had a provision that said the Secretary of Interior had to report the environmental analysis to the committee before that Congress proceeded. They did not do it. So they made sure when they put this law that would not be a requirement like this. And this is why we are where we are, and this is why the law has to be changed. If you agree, of course. Thank you.
Caroline Haynes, followed by Mr. Robert Keller. Ms. Haynes, welcome.
Thank you very much. I am here today on behalf of the Arlington County Urban Forestry Commission, and we continue to have serious objections about the current design of this proposal. We do not believe that this expansion project needs to be either an expansion of the cemetery or preservation of old age forest with high historical and ecological value. We believe with a better design it could be both. I know you've all heard about the public law, and when this property was transferred, it specifically states, and I quote, "The Secretary of the Army shall use the transferred property for the development of the in-ground burial sites and columbarium that are designed to meet the contours of Section 29. In adopting the legislation for the transfer of the section of the Arlington House Woods, Congress recognized the importance of designating a project that preserves the contours of the natural woodland as a backdrop to the Arlington House Lee Mansion and to the Arlington National Cemetery. The Millennium Project as it is currently proposed does not meet this requirement. Specifically, we are concerned about the construction of the loop road into the steep ravine and across the stream bed with a high degree of land disturbance and infilling, which will significantly change the topography. According to the EA, and I quote, "The Millennium Project will require significant earthwork. As currently designed, the project will require over 2/3 of a mile of retaining walls of up to 3 stories high, 30 feet high, and cutting and filling of over 100,000 cubic yards of soil. In our view, this does not meet the requirements of the law that it be developed in the contours of the land. We note that other alternatives that would be less damaging to the topography and existing old age trees were not adequately considered. Specifically, the analysis of alternative F, which you all did not see today, in the EA is, we believe, misleading and appears to have some inaccurate information. We believe that it is possible to design a project that is in keeping with the requirements of the law and that respects the historic, ecological, and cultural value of this site. The Urban Forestry Commission strongly recommends that the project be redesigned to minimize the destruction of Arlington House Woods, both to provide a buffer to the adjacent old-growth forest and to provide an aesthetic backdrop to this expansion project. I'm curious, too, on the varying estimates have been provided as the annual average number of initial burials. We've heard everything from 5,000 a year when we had the site visit on March 16th to 7,000. It's included in the EA. Based on these estimates, and given the current design of about 30,000, initial burial sites, the project would extend the operations of between 4.2 and 6 years, not the 7 to 12 years that we keep hearing about. Redesigning the project to meet the requirements of the law would have a relatively small impact on the longevity of the operations of the cemetery, but would have a tremendous impact on saving irreplaceable historical, ecological, and cultural resources. If the columbarium plan for the area to the west of the proposed new access road were expanded in size, the decrease in burial sites could be reduced or eliminated. We are concerned also that the NEPA process is not being followed appropriately for this project. The cooperating parties group has been told that the project will be at 95% design stage within days of the April 12th, 2013 deadline for public comments on the revised environmental assessment. In our view, this reveals a blatant disregard for the NEPA process and soliciting and responding to issues raised by the public. Likewise, we have serious concerns about the finding of no significant impact. I do not believe that the Army is following its own guidelines under Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 651.39, where the significance, and I quote, is determined by examining both the context and intensity of the proposed action. 12 acres of the 27-acre Millennium Project is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is a registry site for the Virginia Native Plant Society. For this project, context matters a great deal. The Urban Forestry Commission recognizes the pressures to extend the longevity of the operations of the cemetery, and we respect the desires of many of our national heroes and their families to have a final resting spot in our nation's premier national cemetery. We believe that it is possible to both develop a project that extends the operations of the cemetery and preserves the contours of Section 29 as required by law. In our view, the current proposal fails to meet those dual objectives. We urge that the National Capital Planning Commission recommend that this project be redesigned to meet these objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Keller? Mr. Robert Keller? He's not here. Okay. Return that ends the public comment period, and we'll return the discussion to the commission. Mr. Hart, I just have a question. I obviously don't have the law in front of me, but does the preliminary or the concept design meet the contours of Section 29? Or
I'll show you the section.
okay.
It's the easiest way to look at it. And this is the section of the site. This is taken through, and remember, Section 29 is Section 29 is the portion that's shown here in the kind of striped area. So this portion that's yellow is that was part of Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall, is not included in that Section 29. So if you look at it, the section that I was showing you a little earlier just cuts a section through about this portion of it. So about half of that site would be included in that section that was drawn, and I'll get back to that. So this section, again, this is the stream. Get a little closer. This red line is actually showing and this is from the Army. They're showing where the contour, where the original grade is. There is one portion, and I'll show that in a little bit more detail, where this portion of the street is not meeting the contour, and there's a little portion that's about here that's also not meeting it. And give me a sec. Oh, here. So this is the existing grade, and then this is the change in grade for where the roadway and then where the columbaria is. I mean, generally speaking, the contour is here, and that's the portion that the previous speaker was just talking about. When you're putting in the columbaria, they knew that they have to be put on a flat area. So there would have to be some flat areas, some retaining walls that were part of the design. At the time that they created the public law, they did not have any design that they were kind of looking at. It's fairly clear that there was an intention when the land was transferred that it was to be used for either in-ground burials or for columbaria. And it seems as though this is minus this little piece. This is generally following the contours that you have. Again, there is a disagreement on that, as you heard. I think that if you look at it, it can be kind of go either way.
Can you go back to slide 11 for a second?
Sure.
Okay, all the way to the left there, that same dotted line.
Yep. Actually, I can show you a little bit more of a detail of that. You see that?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, I do want to talk about this.
I know, but it's this line that's here.
That line there. Yeah. Okay.
But again, that's not Section 29. So.
Got it.
So I just want to be clear on that. Section 29 is about here in this diagram, because remember, it's this about where this columbaria is. So this portion of it is Fort Myer, or was former Fort Myer.
Okay.
We're talking about.
So if the roadway is out, I'm sorry, Peter, so if the roadway is outside of section 29.
In this, yeah, in this instance, there's, I think there's a part of it about right here that may be in it, but at that point, I don't have a section of it, so it's hard for me to tell you where that is for that, at that location.
I'm sorry, Peter.
Can you show the plan again that shows us where the loop road is?
Yep.
Okay, and why is it necessary for there to actually be a loop road as opposed to a loop road or a road that services the necessary areas rather than cutting through the slope like that?
Is it part of the explanation is the horses don't go in reverse very well?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I know it's. They have looked at.
Could be a trade.
They have looked at an instance where there's a smaller kind of circle.
Right.
And that was. And I can show you the design if you'd like. I mean, it's.
Well, no, I mean, the other thing is that why is that loop road into section 29 as opposed to the other part of the campus?
And sir, if I could, on why the loop road is not only it's the caissons, but when we have a service, we can have up to 400 people attending one service as well. So it's for flow as well as for the caissons. And the reason why it's in that location is it's because the design took into the topography of what we inherited.
So you want to explain that again? I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
The design and why we have the loop road there is the entire design, and I actually have my project manager here who can probably explain it even better than I am, is the reason why it's there is where we have our in-ground burial and where we have our columbarium. There is a reason why the road is placed where the road is placed. Greg, is there anything you want to add there?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, there is a reason, but I'm sorry. Could somebody explain the reason a little bit? Because it's, again, I'm just curious as to why it's not looping through the other section as opposed to through section 29.
This is probably the best way to show. This is the image showing, this is where that loop road is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
This land slopes down. There's actually a drainage area that's included in that portion of the property.
Mm-hmm.
And because of where it drains down and up, it is the topographic changes that happen here make it really hard to do that and then have the space to transition up to this road, which is at a much higher level. You're talking about a 60-foot drop between here and where this is. And if you move this over here, that means that this gets cut. This gets cut in more, and so you're having kind of tiers as you're looking at doing this, at doing the kind of the left-hand side of this.
Is perhaps another way to explain this is for optimal land use planning, based on the requirements for the various in-ground versus crematory and so forth, the columbarium. This is the optimal placement of the crypt space, the burial space, the cremation space, the niche walls, and so forth. And therefore, what follows is the placement of the road, kind of a sequential, linear process, if you will. Is that an accurate description?
Could I just say one thing too, though? We had asked, we had asked and just got the information on, again, the alternative F that you don't show here, that would eliminate that loop road going across the stream. That's really the issue. That's the concern, I think.
Alternative F.
Yes. So it would not cross the stream, and we just got information just a couple days ago that the actual number of burial sites would be exceeds the existing design. And I guess what we were told is that they just want a lot of parking area in the middle of the cemetery. But if you look at the other parts of the cemetery, there are other areas that go like this to areas that don't have a huge amount of parking. So that's really the issue that we've been concerned about, is going across that stream into the very steep ravine. And this alternative avoids that. And so that we were concerned that this wasn't given adequate consideration. And also some of the tree numbers we think are off on this analysis as well. And also this analysis said something about it being violating the Chesapeake Bay ordinances. Well, actually the other one is much more likely to, because it actually crosses the stream valley and would be constructed near an existing seat, whereas this would avoid that. So that was one of the issues that we had, is why wasn't this given greater consideration?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think this also has impacts to the, again, this is the 145-year-old tree area, where there are columbaria, as you see in this image up here. There are columbaria that would be associated with this. This is where the stream is, so the stream would there would be some, I'm not sure what would happen here, but it would likely be that there would have to be either a turning of where the stream is, or it would have to culvert under a portion of this and then kind of come out at the end. So there are impacts with, I guess each of the alternatives that they looked at had impacts, you know, this is just, again, one of the images that were provided to us. The columbaria in most of the images are shown around where the stream area is, and this is because, again, as I think Commissioner Pavancha talked about, this area is where there is kind of a flatter area to be able to put in-ground burials, and then the columbaria are a bit more compact, and the ability to put them in the hillier area seemed to make a little bit more sense.
I do want to add, if I can, thank you, Carlton, you explained it very well. I'm sorry, I'm Greg Hagee. I'm the project manager for the Norfolk District Corps of Engineers. We're the design and construction agent for the cemetery. We conducted multiple planning charrettes for this project, and as was pointed out accurately, it is a challenge. It's ultimately the challenge is to strike the balance and to achieve the best use of the land. We have design criteria to deliver a relatively gentle slope for the interment areas for safe operations and burials, etc. That is precisely why the large green areas, the interment space and the space for in-ground cremated remains are located where they are, and the more difficult terrain with the the steeper slope is more in tune for the columbaria placement. Speaking directly to alternative F as shown here, you can see along the bottom of the image, in the top right image, you can see the orange columbaria courts. And you can see that there is only a very small pedestrian access for those columbaria courts. That was obviously one of the negative factors to alternative F, in that with multiple ceremonies being conducted in this area, upwards of 4 at a time, it is simply unfeasible to not have some sort of access road for those southern or the easternmost columbaria structures. It would be a tremendous challenge for those attending a ceremony, possibly 2 ceremonies in those columbaria structures, to park up above and actually walk that distance all the way down. So that became a very negative factor to this alternative. I also wanted to speak briefly. It was mentioned that the impacts to the perennial stream and the intermittent stream and the seep that was mentioned. In the current design concept, I wish I had a laser pointer, we are actually including bottomless arched bridges in multiple locations, in each location where a bridge was shown, to minimize those impacts to the environment and those water features. Thank you.
Other questions among committee members, commission members? Mr. Provincial.
I have a couple of comments in support of the project. It appears to be a very challenging solution, but meets the spirit and intent. I appreciate very much Mr. Hart's clarification about the relatively small amount of actual excavation in the small portion of this project. So it is consistent, I think, and respectful, and meets the Section 29 requirements to maintain as much as possible the existing contours. I think it was mentioned how supportive that the Commission of Fine Arts has been. I think in a couple, 3 areas, I think it's significant we need to reinforce. I think they're pleased with the environmental impacts, the very modest impacts. the protection to the maximum extent of the trees, the stream restoration. I think one of the reports even talks about, not a CFA report, but a negative report talks about destruction of a stream, but I don't think that's at all accurate. I think all the streams, even the intermittent streams, are being preserved and restored. Did I understand also that perhaps columbarium B is coming out? So there's even less impacts? The site might be reserved for a future columbarium, but at the most current plan, removes
The most
B?
current plan, sir, you are correct. Columbarium B, the one that's standalone
Got it.
columbarium, is going to be taken out of the design.
Gotcha. And the benefit of that would be even less net loss of trees, at least initially?
Sir, what it will be, we will not only, there will be a net less loss of trees, but we will also be able to add more trees into that because
Excellent.
that area is currently where we have the warehouse, which right now we would love to put trees back in there rather than have those concrete structures that we currently have.
Right. While you're at the podium, would you also mention the annual tree planting program?
well,
I
I
think
can-
the commissioners would benefit from that.
Literally, we average 240 trees a year that we plant in the cemetery, but I just talked to my arborist this morning. We've already planted 115 this spring. In the 240 that we plant, that does not count the family members who donate trees for their loved ones to be placed in the cemetery. So above and beyond these projects, we plant on an average of 240 additional trees in the cemetery. And if I may add, while we're talking about trees, combined between Hurricane Sandy and the derecho, we lost 73 of our trees at Arlington National Cemetery. So what we do is we replace those trees that we lose with another tree, but Mother Nature has a tendency to wreak havoc on Arlington as it does Arlington County and everyone else in the district.
Speaking of the trees, for your consideration, one way to look at not only the military member remains that go there, but if you will, the horses do their duty, and perhaps in a sense, metaphorically, the trees have done their duty. They have been silent sentinels. They have provided a dignified environment for those very special remains, and perhaps one disposition of the trees, as opposed to being landfilled or mulch, could be, there was a beam and lintel structure. I don't know if wood was the material of choice for that. Perhaps some of the trees could be recycled and used again, benches, mementos with their certification of authenticity in the gift shop. So a variety of options might be available
And we
to
do-
respectfully.
Yes, and we also, some of our trees
Acknowledge
that
the
come down,
trees.
we do turn into mulch and use it throughout the cemetery for roads and so forth. So that is something that we are looking at, Mr. Project.
Great, thank you.
I have one question, Mr. Hart. I notice in the recommendations it says the cemetery is to reach full capacity in 2023. But on page 7 it says 2025. I just want to make sure which is correct.
They've actually said two different numbers, and I know that they're talking about 2024 now, so I think that
There's a difference for that. It is 2025 for in-ground and 2024 for columbarium. So it was 2025. We will correct that for the record, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the EDR needs to be corrected just for accuracy.
One minor addition, since we're going in that vein, minor correction to the EDR. I think it says previous action, it says no action. I think within the EDR, it talks about a November 2008 final approval of columbarium 9.
Yeah, well, the no action is for this particular site. And if you want to get into it, there are quite a few columbaria that have been approved over the last, 10 years.
Right. I was referring to the previous action on top of page 3. Previous actions by the committee, or by the commission, I'm sorry.
Yes, but the previous actions usually pertain to this particular site. And so it was just saying that. I was kind of giving some information about some of the other columbaria that have been, approved. So there was some confusion, I understand that, but just trying to focus just on this.
Hearing no further discussion, is there further discussion, Mr. May?
I mean, I don't have questions. I'm very sympathetic to the concern about the holding the topography and the resulting tree loss, because it seems to me that those things are tied together. I'm not fully familiar with the environmental assessment. I know that from the Park Service's perspective in terms of impacts to Arlington House, what's being done is you know, on balance, beneficial to Arlington House because the trees there are being preserved, and the stream restoration is a benefit from our perspective. But I have to say that, you know, the idea of cutting so much into that slope in order to build a roadway is kind of tough to go along with. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not going to vote for the comments, because this is just comments on the concept, but I would encourage further investigation of how to minimize that cut and to minimize the tree loss.
Did you want to amend the?
I'll have to look more carefully at exactly what the action is.
You could amend the first bullet at the bottom. Continue to refine the design and minimize harm. Maybe add something there if you were inclined.
While Mr. Mayor was reviewing that, I was hoping that he would also comment that the stream restoration here is reminiscent of the ICCV project in Bethesda and should be commended.
We're very pleased about the stream restoration here, yes.
Peter, I was thinking about.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
if you're looking for.
Yeah, I see it there. You know, it says, the comment there is to explore decreasing the width of the roadbed in the area of Arlington House Woods as a way of further reducing tree loss. So I guess I'm looking for an aspirational statement.
Say the same thing.
Yeah. Well, since you're so good at them, you want to make a suggestion, or maybe Mr. Goning, you want?
That may be sufficient, shouldn't it?
Well, no.
We can entertain your aspirational statement.
Yeah, I get to make one too. I would urge the Department of the Army to look at decreasing the width. I would just say encourage a thorough exploration of decreasing the width. You know, beef it up a little bit. I mean, unless you want to push farther.
You want to be that specific, decreasing the width? Or
Well, this
or
is
do you want
what's
to make
already-
a more general aspirational statement about tree loss?
Well, this is what's already in the statement,
Right.
is decreasing the width of the roadbed in the area of Arlington House as a way of further reducing tree loss. I mean, I think that's what it boils down to here. I mean, are you seeing a broader issue with tree loss due to other factors other than the width of the roadway?
Well, I think, are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
I think significant tree loss is unavoidable.
Absolutely.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with making, yes, an aspirational statement
Okay.
that
So-
this be of paramount concern through design development.
Right.
I think we're stating the obvious, and they're making efforts to do that, but maybe a little encouragement for sustained effort through design development is not a bad idea.
I don't disagree, so we would, again, a thorough exploration of decreasing the width of the roadbed and any other available means.
Right, I don't think that I would limit the aspirational statement to the width of the roadbed.
Right, and I agree with you. I wouldn't limit it. I would still want to mention it, though.
Fine.
Anybody capture anything that I wrote there? Or I said there?
Okay, here, you'd encourage a thorough exploration of decreasing the width of the roadbed in the area of the Arlington House Woods and other means of further reducing tree loss.
Do we need to be reminded and acknowledge that we're nearly at 100% design in order to meet a deadline for public comment period? Did I hear that?
I would be
earlier?
very, very disturbed to learn that they're nearly 100% designed when you're in the middle of an
Concept
EA.
stage.
Right.
So I would really don't want to.
What was the reference earlier to the?
Aren't we at concept?
Concept.
Okay.
The comment earlier was the concern about us advancing so far in the design stage when the EA has not yet been finalized and a FONSI signed.
Yep, that's what I recall here.
And that is accurate. It is regrettable that our schedules are such that we are advancing on parallel tracks, more or less. That does not to say that we are not still incorporating comments learned through the NEPA process into our design.
So if you were to give a percentage of where you are in design development, what would you say it is? Is it really near 100%?
Very close, ma'am.
That's disturbing.
We're publishing
That's a shame. You had me until then.
But there are acknowledged changes, such as the deletion of columbarium B and other refinements that you continue to make.
And I would like to clarify also for the record that that a previous draft of the environmental assessment was released in December. Comments were captured in December and early January. And based on those comments, we have incorporated and changed the design of the project. And if I could have a project graphic, I could point some of those out.
Mr. Hart, did you have something to add?
No, I mean.
Okay.
If I could just see the overall project image, I could point out some of those design changes based on the comments received. Specifically, one of the areas where we have reduced the width of the road.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Can I ask a question though before you start that? So when's the construction schedule? When are you supposed to get, notice to proceed and go? In real life, not in fantasy land.
We're targeting an aggressive contract award at the end of September.
Contract award, but notice to proceed would be?
Weeks after.
Wow. So if you're close to 100%, you still have time to make changes if they need to be.
Yes, ma'am.
Because you're not swinging a hammer until the fall or digging a hole. So, okay. Never mind.
Based on comments received, the portion of the loop road that does pass, if I could go to the previous image that I just saw, the overall project graphic.
What I'm looking for?
Just the overall project graphic, the current rendering. Yes, any one of those. The portion on the very bottom of the image, the loop road on the very bottom, that portion of that road has been reduced from 30 feet down to 22 feet. And that is to allow parking on one side of the road for ceremonies while allowing a separate lane of traffic to pass by. The remaining width, the remaining portions of the road are all 30 feet, and that's to allow parking on both sides of the road for ceremonies up in the interment areas, as well as a possible simultaneous ceremony down in the columbaria area, and allow one lane of traffic to pass through, including emergency vehicles, an ambulance, fire truck. A couple of the design changes, if you can go to the image that shows the purple bridges. Okay, so based on the comments received already in the NEPA process, the very bottom loop road, the southern bridge, that portion of the road has been realigned. It bumps out a little bit. It looks odd when you look at it from this perspective, but previously it was more of a consistent arc. We bumped that road out a little bit, and that was to miss and avoid a large stand of very valuable red oaks in that area. So we're saving those trees. The large arch bridge that goes over the perennial stream, we realigned that road again to save a large, dense stand of valuable trees. And the other smaller arched bridge, that is actually on the pedestrian walkway. As all of those are arch structures, it allows wildlife to naturally traverse underneath them compared to a box culvert or more of a rigid structure. Thank you.
Can I make one more comment?
I would say that by proceeding to 100%, you may have taken us for granted a little bit. But any further discussion, Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question for Mr. Hart and maybe one for Mrs. Condon. The maintenance facility, is that staying or being relocated somewhere else?
They're looking at relocating it, and it's probably best for them to.
So yeah, I would want to know where is that going to go, and if you could speak just for a minute briefly as to what your longer-term solutions are beyond the 7 to 12 years that this will buy you.
The maintenance facility, sir, that is there, it's really a contractor maintenance yard. And so what we're doing is we're moving that to a current area in the cemetery where we have a contractor for the Potomac Interceptor project that is going to be finishing the project, so we will move it there. I'm sorry. So what we will do, and we're also lessening the footprint of what we provide for the maintenance yard because in the section they're in now, you give them space, they expand to the space. So that will be located to another section of the cemetery where we currently have a spoils area for this one. And I'm sorry, the second question.
It's just briefly, what your longer-term capacity expansion plans are, since this project will only get you 7 to 12 years.
Right, and then, sir, as you know, we also have the Navy Annex property, which is where the Air Force Memorial is. Those buildings are currently being taken down, and we were just appropriated the dollars in our FY13 to start the planning and design for the Navy Annex project. So that will be our next expansion project that will allow us to have our first interment space well into the 2050s. And for those that aren't cemeterians, I wasn't one until June 10th of 2010. What first interment space means is it's the first burial of a veteran or their loved one. There is always a subsequent burial of a spouse, and that will extend well beyond 2050, but it will extend our first burial space to 2050 with the Navy Annex project.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I could add, that project is on track, actually even ahead of schedule, and that will turn over more than 40 acres. So tremendous capacity with that adjacent site. Good, very good joint planning with Arlington County and some of the other inhabitants. Proper optimal placement of the facilities, for example, south of Columbia Pike, in an effort to minimize caissons passing back and forth from the two portions of the site. Lots of options on the table. Arlington County, for example, would like to have a Freedmen's Heritage Museum Center. There's opportunities to do some joint planning for visitor centers for the very close by Pentagon Memorial and the Air Force Memorial and the Arlington and the cemetery. So lots of opportunities to jointly plan those areas.
So will we see that before the drawings are nearly 100% complete?
We would hate to fail to meet your expectations to bring you anything less than 100% designed.
Yeah, the normal, what's normal for concept? 30%, something like that?
35, 65.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest, or I would move that we modify that one bullet point as Mr. Goni had recapped it for us.
Yeah, it's something along the lines of encourage a thorough explanation of decreasing the width of the road bed in the area of the Arlington House Woods and other means for further reducing tree loss.
Yes.
Okay.
In modest opposition to that, the Army has shared with me that they are willing, more than willing, and have clearly demonstrate their willingness to fulfill all 4 of these expectations for subsequent submissions, as currently stated.
So the amendment has been moved, and I presume there's a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, so this vote's on the amendment only. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. 1 no. Now before us is the amended EDR. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the amended EDR, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No, it wasn't moved? Oh. Is there a motion on the EDR as amended? It's been moved and seconded. Forgive me. All in favor of the amended EDR, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's approved. Any further business to come before us? Hearing none. Thank you for a very good meeting, and we are adjourned.